There exists a lie so fundamental, so deeply embedded in the fabric of human thinking, that to question it feels like questioning the ground beneath your feet. This lie has shaped every institution, every belief system, every approach to solving human problems for thousands of years. It whispers in your ear each morning as you wake, reminding you of your limitations, your circumstances, your past failures. It masquerades as common sense, as scientific fact, as the way things simply are. The lie is this: that the external world creates your internal experience, that circumstances produce feelings, that you're at the mercy of conditions beyond your control, forever reacting to a world that acts upon you first. This deception runs so deep that when someone suggests the opposite might be true, the mind rejects it instantly, almost violently. Yet what if this fundamental assumption about the nature of reality is not only wrong, but backwards? Consider for a moment the curious case of identical situations producing entirely different experiences in different people. Two individuals face the same challenge, encounter the same setback, receive the same diagnosis. One crumbles under the weight of circumstance while the other transforms it into opportunity. The external facts remain identical, yet the internal realities could not be more different. How is this possible if circumstances truly dictate experience? The conventional mind scrambles to explain this away. It speaks of personality differences, of varying levels of resilience, of different coping mechanisms. But these explanations only push the mystery one layer deeper. They fail to address the fundamental question: why do some people seem to live in a different world altogether, where limitations become launching pads and impossibilities become inevitable? There are those who walk among us who appear to operate by errant laws entirely. They speak with quiet certainty about outcomes that haven't yet appeared. They move through challenges with a peace that defies explanation. They assume success before any evidence supports it, and somehow reality bends to accommodate their assumption. To the rational mind, they appear deluded, living in fantasy, yet their results speak a different language entirely. These individuals understand something that challenges the very foundation of how we've been taught to think about life. They know that the creative power doesn't lie in the external world of facts and conditions, but in the internal world of imagination and assumption. They've discovered that the feeling you carry within you is not the result of your circumstances, but the cause of them. This reversal of causation represents perhaps the most revolutionary understanding available to human consciousness. It suggests that you are not the victim of your world, but its creator, not the effect of conditions, but their cause, not at the mercy of circumstances, but their architect. The implications of this understanding are so vast, so transformative, that they threaten every power structure built upon the assumption of human limitation. Every advance in technology, every breakthrough in science, every improvement in living conditions has been achieved by manipulating external conditions. We learned to change our environment, but we never learned to change ourselves. We became experts at rearranging the furniture of life while remaining ignorant of the consciousness that creates the room itself. The result is a society of tremendous external power coupled with profound internal helplessness. People who can communicate instantly across the globe feel unable to communicate with their own family members. Individuals who have access to all human knowledge at their fingertips cannot seem to find the wisdom to create personal fulfillment. Citizens of nations with incredible wealth feel trapped in personal poverty. The external mastery has not translated into internal mastery because the two operate by entirely different principles. External mastery works through force, manipulation, and control. It requires understanding the laws of the physical world and learning to work with them or around them. It deals with effects and tries to produce desired effects by manipulating causes. This approach has given us airplanes and antibiotics, computers and communication systems, but it has also given us the illusion that this same approach can create internal fulfillment, personal transformation, and spiritual satisfaction. The principles of imagination and assumption operate by entirely different laws. They work through yielding rather than forcing, through feeling rather than thinking, through assumption rather than manipulation. They deal with causes rather than effects, with states of being rather than external conditions. To apply external methods to internal creation is to guarantee frustration and failure. This explains why so many modern approaches to personal development and achievement fail to produce lasting results. They attempt to use external methods to create internal changes. They focus on actions and strategies rather than assumptions and feelings. They try to manipulate circumstances rather than transform consciousness. They work with effects while ignoring causes. The individual who understands the primacy of imagination in a modern context gains an enormous advantage. While others struggle to change their external world through external means, the enlightened person changes their external world through internal transformation. While others react to market conditions, social pressures, and economic circumstances, the conscious creator assumes the internal state that will attract the external conditions they desire. This understanding transforms every aspect of modern life. In business, instead of competing for limited resources, you assume abundance and attract opportunities that others cannot see. In relationships, instead of trying to change others or find the perfect person, you assume the feeling of being loved and lovable and attract relationships that reflect this assumption. In health, instead of waiting for medical science to heal you, you assume perfect vitality and allow your body to express this inner conviction. The modern world provides unprecedented opportunities for the conscious application of these principles. The speed of communication means that assumptions can manifest more quickly than ever before. The interconnectedness of global systems means that a shift in consciousness can create ripple effects across vast networks. The availability of information means that those who understand these principles can find support and validation more easily than in any previous era. Yet the same modern conditions that accelerate manifestation also accelerate the creation of unwanted experiences. The person who assumes lack in an abundant world creates more dramatic poverty than would have been possible in a truly scarce environment. The individual who assumes rejection in a globally connected world can experience isolation more profound than a hermit in the wilderness. The consciousness that assumes danger in a relatively safe society can create threats more terrifying than those faced by earlier generations. The modern media in particular becomes either a powerful ally or a dangerous enemy to the individual who understands these principles. Media content is designed to capture attention, and attention naturally gravitates toward the dramatic, the problematic, the fearful. The person who passively consumes media content absorbs assumptions of lack, danger, conflict, and limitation. Their imagination becomes filled with images of what they do not want, and these images, felt deeply enough and repeated often enough, begin to manifest in their personal experience. But the conscious individual can use media differently. They can select content that supports the assumptions they wish to embody. They can limit exposure to information that strengthens unwanted beliefs. They can even use news of problems and challenges as reminders to assume their opposite in their own experience. When they hear of economic difficulty, they assume personal prosperity. When they learn of relationship conflicts, they assume harmonious love. When they encounter stories of illness, they assume perfect health. The speed and scale of modern life also require a more sophisticated understanding of how to maintain desired assumptions in the face of constant external pressures. The individual in a simpler time might have been able to assume a new state and maintain it without much challenge. The modern person faces constant bombardment of information, opinions, and influences that can shake even the strongest assumptions. This requires what might be called assumption hygiene, the conscious maintenance of desired internal states despite external pressures. This means being selective about the conversations you engage in, the media you consume, the environments you frequent, and even the thoughts you entertain. It means recognizing that your assumptions are precious and must be protected from the casual assumptions of others. The modern understanding of psychology, while still largely materialistic, has stumbled upon many truths that support these ancient principles. Research on neuroplasticity shows that the brain can rewire itself based on repeated thoughts and feelings. Studies of successful individuals reveal that they tend to visualize their goals and feel their success before achieving it. Investigation of the placebo effect demonstrates that belief can create physical changes in the body. While mainstream psychology still interprets these findings through a materialistic lens, the individual who understands imagination's creative power can see them as validation of deeper truths. The brain rewires itself to support assumptions held with feeling. Visualization works because it creates the feeling of the wish fulfilled. The placebo effect works because belief creates the assumption of healing, and assumption creates manifestation. Even quantum physics, despite its materialistic interpretation, points toward the creative role of consciousness in shaping reality. The observer effect suggests that consciousness plays an active role in determining physical events. While scientists struggle to maintain the fiction of objective reality independent of the observer, their own discoveries make this position increasingly untenable. The individual who grasps these connections can live in the modern world with ancient wisdom. They understand that all external achievements begin as internal assumptions. They know that lasting change must come from within rather than from without. They recognize that the ultimate technology is consciousness itself, and the ultimate skill is the conscious direction of imagination and feeling. This understanding becomes particularly powerful when applied to modern challenges that seem overwhelming from a purely external perspective. Climate change, social inequality, political division, economic instability, these appear to be massive external problems requiring external solutions. But the individual who understands the creative power of consciousness knows that these external conditions reflect collective all assumptions. The transformation of these conditions requires not just external action, but the internal transformation of the assumptions that created them. As more individuals begin to assume abundance rather than scarcity, cooperation rather than competition, love rather than fear, the external world begins to reflect these new assumptions. Change happens not through force or manipulation, but through the gradual shift of consciousness that makes new realities inevitable. Now comes the moment of ultimate decision. You have heard these ideas, perhaps found them intellectually interesting, maybe even emotionally compelling. But intellectual interest and emotional excitement are not enough to create the transformation these principles promise. Knowledge without application remains merely entertainment. Understanding without practice produces no results. The question that confronts every individual who encounters these truths is this: will you live them, or will you merely think about them? Will you begin to assume the feeling of your desires fulfilled, or will you continue to wait for circumstances to justify feeling fulfilled? Will you take responsibility for your creative power, or will you continue to play the victim to conditions you have unknowingly created? This decision requires more courage than most people possess. It asks you to abandon the comfortable position of victim and accept the awesome responsibility of creator. It demands that you stop blaming circumstances, other people, past experiences, or present conditions for your current reality. It requires you to admit that every limitation you experience exists first in your own assumptions about what is possible. The path forward is both simple and demanding. Simple because it requires only that you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and persist in that assumption until it hardens into fact. Demanding because it asks you to maintain this assumption despite all evidence to the contrary, despite the doubts of others, despite the resistance of your own conditioned mind. You must learn to live as if your desires are already realized while they still appear unrealized. You must feel successful while others see only failure. You must assume love while experiencing loneliness. You must embody health while symptoms persist. You must carry yourself as the person you wish to become before becoming that person is externally obvious. This requires a fundamental shift in how you understand the relationship between cause and effect. Instead of trying to feel good because good things happen, you must assume good feelings to make good things happen. Instead of waiting for success to feel successful, you must feel successful to become successful. Instead of hoping that love will make you feel lovable, you must feel lovable to attract love. The world will not support you in this transformation. Society is built on the assumption that you must earn good feelings through external achievement. Every institution, every authority, every expert will tell you to be realistic, to face facts, to accept limitations. You must learn to smile at this advice while privately knowing that ye are living by higher laws. Your rational mind will resist this process. It will produce every argument for why your desires cannot be fulfilled, why your assumptions are unrealistic, why you should accept current conditions as permanent. You must learn to acknowledge these thoughts without being controlled by them. Reason is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. The evidence of your senses will contradict your assumptions. Your bank account will show lack while you assume abundance. Your relationships will appear troubled while you assume love. Your body will display symptoms while you assume health. You must learn to see through these appearances to the reality you are creating through your assumptions. But as you persist in living from these new assumptions, as you maintain the feeling of your wishes fulfilled despite all contrary evidence, something magical begins to happen. The external world begins to reorganize itself to match your internal reality. Opportunities appear that were previously invisible. People respond to you differently. Circumstances shift in your favor. What seemed impossible becomes inevitable. This is not magic in the supernatural sense. It is the natural operation of consciousness when properly understood and consciously directed. You are not violating natural law. You are applying a higher natural law that most people never discover. You are not forcing reality to change. You are allowing reality to express the assumptions you have impressed upon it. The ultimate truth is this: imagination creates reality and reason follows your lead. When you assume a new state with sufficient feeling and persistence, your rational mind will find ways to justify and explain the manifestation. When you feel wealthy, you will think thoughts and take actions that attract wealth. When you assume health, you will make choices that support vitality. When you embody love, you will draw loving relationships into your experience. You are not at the mercy of circumstances. Circumstances are at the mercy of your assumptions. You are not limited by your past, your genetics, your education, or your environment. You are limited only by what you assume to be true about yourself and your possibilities. Change your assumptions and you change your world. Feel differently about yourself and you become different. Assume your desires fulfilled and they must manifest as facts. The time for wondering is over. The time for experimenting has begun. Choose one desire, assume its fulfillment, and feel that assumption until it becomes more real to you than your current circumstances. Live from this new assumption persistently and watch as your external world transforms to match your internal reality. This is not theory to be debated, but truth to be demonstrated. The laboratory is your own consciousness. The experiment is your own life. The results will speak for themselves. The mind that accepts this truth must reconstruct its entire understanding of what it means to be human. It must abandon the comfortable position of victim and accept the awesome responsibility of creator. It must stop reacting to life and start creating it. Most find this responsibility too great to bear, preferring the familiar prison of circumstance to the unfamiliar freedom of conscious creation. Within you lies a power so fundamental that you use it every moment of every day without recognition. This power shapes your world with mathematical precision, creating experiences that perfectly match your internal states. It responds not to your wishes or your hopes, but to your assumptions about what is true. It is the power of imagination wedded to feeling, and it operates whether you acknowledge it or not. The question that haunts every seeker of truth eventually becomes this: if imagination truly creates reality, why do so few people seem to know it? Why do the majority live lives of quiet desperation, bound by circumstances they believe they cannot change? The answer lies not in the absence of this power, but in its misdirection. Most people imagine vividly and feel deeply, but they do so in service of their limitations rather than their liberation. Every worry is an act of creation. Every fearful assumption about the future is imagination hard at work, building tomorrow's problems from today's anxieties. Every internal conversation that rehearses failure is the creative power in action, just pointed in the wrong direction. The power is there, operative and ever present. The only question is whether you will direct it consciously or allow it to run automatically, creating by default rather than by design. The human mind contains within itself two distinct aspects that most people never learn to distinguish. There is the reasoning faculty, which analyzes, compares, and judges based on past experience and present evidence. Then there is something far more mysterious and powerful, the faculty of imagination, which has the capacity to assume the reality of states that reason declares impossible. These two aspects of mind are not equal partners in the creative process. One leads, the other follows. One creates, the other explains. One assumes new realities into being, the other finds the logical steps to make them manifest. The tragedy of most human lives lies in getting this relationship backwards, allowing reason to lead and imagination to follow when the natural order demands the reverse. Imagination is not the capacity for fantasy or daydreaming, though it has been reduced to this in popular understanding. True imagination is the divine power within human consciousness, the ability to assume the feeling of already being what you desire to become, already having what you wish to possess, already experiencing what you want to encounter. When this assumption is made with sufficient feeling and persistence, the subconscious mind accepts it as true and begins to externalize it as fact. The subconscious mind knows no difference between an experience vividly imagined and an experience physically lived. To this deeper aspect of consciousness, the feeling of the wish fulfilled is identical to the fulfillment itself. When you assume the feeling of your desire realized, you are not engaging in make-believe. You are engaging in the fundamental act of creation. You are planting a seed in the creative medium of consciousness that must, by its very nature, sprout into physical manifestation. This creative medium responds not to your conscious desires, but to your deepest assumptions about reality. It takes the feeling tone of your imagination and builds a world around it. If you assume lack, it creates circumstances that confirm lack. If you assume abundance, it creates circumstances that express abundance. If you assume limitation, limitation becomes your experience. If you assume freedom, freedom becomes your reality. The conscious reasoning mind, meanwhile, serves an entirely different function. It observes the world that imagination has created and attempts to explain how it came to be. It looks at effects and traces them back to logical causes. It creates stories about why things are as they are, always missing the true cause, the assumption that preceded the manifestation. When someone achieves unexpected success, reason explains it through hard work, good timing, or lucky breaks. When someone experiences repeated failure, reason points to poor decisions, difficult circumstances, or bad luck. These explanations satisfy the rational mind, but they miss the deeper truth, that the success or failure first existed as an assumption in imagination before it appeared as a fact in experience. The person who assumes success works hard, but so does the person who assumes struggle. The difference lies not in the effort expended, but in the feeling from which the effort springs. The one who assumes success works from a feeling of confidence and expectation. Their work has a different quality, a different energy. They make different choices, notice different opportunities, and attract different responses from others, all because they are working from the assumption of an already accomplished result. This is why reason, valuable as it is for navigation and analysis, becomes destructive when it attempts to lead the creative process. Reason looks at present circumstances and concludes what is possible. It examines past failures and predicts future limitations. It creates elaborate logical arguments for why desires cannot be fulfilled, why dreams cannot be realized, why transformation cannot occur. But imagination operates in an entirely different realm. It assumes the reality of the desired state regardless of present evidence. It feels the joy of success before success appears. It experiences the peace of resolution before problems are solved. It lives in the satisfaction of fulfillment before desires are physically manifest. From this assumption, this feeling, this imaginative reality, the external world begins to reorganize itself. Throughout human history, there have always been those who understood this secret relationship between internal assumption and external manifestation. They were the builders of civilizations, the discoverers of new worlds, the creators of art and literature that moved human consciousness forward. They understood that to change their world, they must first change their assumptions about what is possible. These individuals did not wait for circumstances to grant them permission to feel successful, peaceful, or fulfilled. They assumed these states first in imagination and allowed their external world to conform to their internal reality. They knew that the feeling of the wish fulfilled is not the reward for achievement, but the cause of it. The ancient mystery schools taught this principle through symbol and ritual, understanding that direct teaching of such revolutionary truth would be rejected by minds conditioned to believe in the primacy of external conditions. They spoke of death and rebirth, knowing that to live from imagination rather than circumstance requires the death of the old sense of self and the birth of a new identity, one that assumes its desires fulfilled rather than struggling to fulfill them. The great religious texts, beneath their symbolic language, point to the same truth. They speak of faith that moves mountains, of believing you receive before you see, of the kingdom of heaven being within you. These are not moral platitudes or religious platitudes, but precise instructions for conscious creation. They describe the mechanics of how imagination, when wedded to feeling, becomes the creative force that shapes physical reality. Modern science, in its study of the placebo effect, has stumbled upon this same principle from a different angle. When patients assume they are receiving effective treatment, their bodies often respond as if they actually are, even when they receive nothing but sugar pills. The assumption of healing, felt deeply enough, becomes healing itself. The medical establishment struggles to explain this phenomenon because it challenges the very foundation of materialist thinking, the belief that physical conditions create internal states rather than the reverse. Yet the evidence continues to mount that consciousness plays a far more active role in shaping experience than mainstream thought acknowledges. Quantum physics has revealed that the observer affects the observed, that reality at its most fundamental level is far more malleable and consciousness dependent than classical physics suggested. The rigid materialist worldview, which sees consciousness as merely an epiphenomenon of brain activity, begins to crumble under the weight of its own discoveries. The individuals who have intuitively grasped this truth throughout history operated from what can only be called a reversed causation. Where others saw effects and tried to trace them to external causes, these visionaries saw the true cause, the internal assumption that preceded the external manifestation. They understood that to change effects, you must change the assumption that created them. To alter circumstances, you must alter the feeling from which circumstances spring. This understanding transforms every challenge from an external problem to be solved into an internal assumption to be changed. Instead of asking how circumstances can be manipulated to produce desired feelings, the enlightened individual asks how feelings can be assumed to produce desired circumstances. Instead of waiting for success to feel successful, they feel successful to become successful. Instead of hoping conditions will change to bring peace, they assume peace to change conditions. The implications of this reversal extend far beyond personal achievement or individual satisfaction. When enough individuals begin to operate from this understanding, entire cultures can shift. Limitations that seem permanent dissolve. Problems that appeared unsolvable find resolution. Realities that were considered impossible become inevitable. But this transformation requires a fundamental shift in how we understand the relationship between mind and world. It demands that we stop seeing ourselves as separate from our environment, acted upon by forces beyond our control, and start recognizing ourselves as the creative center from which our experience radiates outward. It requires that we assume responsibility not just for our actions, but for the very assumptions from which our actions spring. This responsibility reveals itself most powerfully in what might be called the laboratory of the heart, that sacred space where assumption transforms into feeling and feeling crystallizes into fact. For it is not enough to intellectually understand that imagination creates reality. The mind may accept this concept, even find it fascinating, but until it descends from the head into the heart, until it becomes a felt experience rather than a mental idea, it remains powerless to create any meaningful change. Feeling is the secret of all creation, not the emotion that reacts to circumstances, but the feeling that assumes circumstances into being. This is a distinction that most people never make, and it explains why so many who discover these principles still struggle to apply them effectively. They attempt to manufacture feeling based on what they see, rather than assuming feeling to create what they will see. The reactive feeling observes the empty bank account and feels poor. The creative feeling assumes abundance and feels rich before any external evidence supports it. The reactive feeling sees the troubled relationship and feels rejected. The creative feeling assumes love and feels cherished while the relationship still appears problematic. The reactive feeling witnesses the illness and feels sick. The creative feeling assumes perfect health and feels vital even as symptoms persist. This distinction between reactive and creative feeling represents perhaps the most crucial understanding in all of conscious creation. Most people spend their lives in reactive feeling, allowing their internal states to be dictated by external conditions. They feel successful when they achieve success, peaceful when circumstances are harmonious, loved when others show them love. But this is to mistake effect for cause, to allow the tail to wag the dog. The individual who understands the creative power of feeling operates from an entirely different premise. They recognize that the feeling state they inhabit becomes the creative cause of their external experience. They understand that to feel poor while seeking wealth is to create more poverty. To feel lonely while seeking companionship is to perpetuate loneliness. To feel weak while seeking strength is to maintain weakness. Instead, they enter into the feeling of their desire fulfilled before any evidence appears to justify that feeling. They feel wealthy while their bank account reads zero. They feel loved while alone. They feel successful while others see only failure. This is not self-deception or positive thinking. It is the conscious direction of the creative force that operates, whether we recognize it or not. The heart becomes a laboratory because it is here that assumptions are tested and refined through direct experience. When you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, you immediately discover whether that assumption is genuine or merely intellectual. The heart cannot lie. It cannot pretend to feel what it does not truly assume. This is why so many struggle with these principles. They attempt to feel their way into new states while still fundamentally assuming their current limitations. The genuine assumption of a desired state produces a subtle but unmistakable shift in feeling. There is a quiet confidence, a peaceful expectation, a sense of naturalness about the desired condition. It feels normal to be successful, natural to be loved, obvious that problems will resolve. This feeling carries with it a conviction that needs no external proof because it knows itself to be true. When this feeling is achieved, something remarkable begins to happen. The subconscious mind, accepting this new assumption as true, begins to reorganize the individual's entire experience to match it. Thoughts change to align with the new assumption. Actions become more consistent with the desired outcome. Opportunities that were invisible before suddenly become apparent. People respond differently. Circumstances shift in ways that seem coincidental, but reveal a deeper pattern when viewed from the understanding of imagination's creative power. The process is not always immediate or dramatic. Often it unfolds gradually, naturally, in ways that preserve the appearance of logical causation. The subconscious mind is a master at creating plausible pathways from assumption to manifestation. It arranges circumstances so skillfully that the conscious mind can always find rational explanations for what appears to be coincidence or good fortune. But the individual who has learned to work with feeling knows the true cause behind these apparent coincidences. They recognize their own creative power at work, reshaping their world from the inside out. They begin to live with a sense of authorship over their experience that transforms their entire relationship with life. This laboratory of the heart requires patience and persistence. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is not a temporary emotional state to be summoned when convenient, but a new identity to be gradually assumed and inhabited. It asks you to live as if your desire is already realized, to carry yourself as if you already are what you wish to become, to respond to life from the assumption that your good is inevitable rather than improbable. The cultivation of this feeling often requires what might be called a holy imagination, the ability to dwell in states that are invisible to the physical senses, but more real to consciousness than anything the eyes can see. This imagination becomes a private theater where the individual can rehearse being what they wish to become, experiencing over and over again the feeling of their desire fulfilled until it becomes more familiar than their current circumstances. In this theater of the mind, the most profound transformations occur. Here, the shy person rehearses being confident until confidence feels natural. The poor person experiences abundance until wealth feels normal. The sick person dwells in perfect health until vitality becomes their assumed state. These are not fantasies or daydreams, but deliberate exercises in conscious creation. The theater operates according to precise principles. The more vivid and detailed the imaginal experience, the more powerfully it impresses the subconscious mind. The more frequently a scene is rehearsed, the more deeply it becomes embedded as an assumption. The more feeling is invested in the imaginal act, the more quickly it tends to externalize as fact. But perhaps most importantly, the imaginal scene must imply the fulfillment of the desire rather than its pursuit. The mind that pictures itself struggling toward a goal is creating more struggle. The mind that pictures itself working hard for success is creating more work. The consciousness that imagines its left asking for what it wants is creating a reality of perpetual asking rather than receiving. The master of imagination learns to construct scenes that imply fulfillment. Instead of imagining the process of getting wealthy, they imagine having wealth and what that would feel like. Instead of picturing themselves finding love, they imagine being loved and the feeling that would produce. Instead of visualizing the healing process, they imagine being perfectly healthy and the vitality that would accompany such a state. This approach bypasses the rational mind's tendency to focus on the how of manifestation and goes directly to the what, the end state desired. The subconscious mind, accepting this end state as real, begins to create the bridge of incidents that will make it manifest in the physical world. The how takes care of itself when the what is assumed with sufficient feeling and persistence. The theater of the mind becomes most powerful when it engages all the senses. The touch of success, the sound of congratulations, the sight of desired conditions, the taste of fulfillment, the scent of achievement. When imagination can create a multi-sensory experience of the wish fulfilled, the subconscious mind accepts it as completely real. To consciousness, there is no difference between a vividly imagined experience and a physically lived one. This is why children who live so naturally in imagination often seem to create their desires with effortless ease. Their imaginal experiences feel completely real to them. They have not yet learned to distinguish between what is imagined and what is physical, and this absence of distinction is actually a gift. The adult who can return to this childlike capacity for vivid imagination while retaining the wisdom to direct it consciously becomes a master of their reality. Yet despite the elegance and power of these principles, they face enormous resistance in a world that has built its entire structure on the assumption of human limitation. This resistance comes from multiple sources, each protecting its own version of the lie that external conditions create internal states. The scientific establishment, built on materialism, resists because consciousness-created reality threatens the foundation of its worldview. If mind creates matter rather than matter creating mind, Entire fields of study must be reconsidered. Research methodologies based on the assumption of objective reality independent of consciousness become questionable. The comfortable position of the detached observer studying a world separate from themselves dissolves into the recognition that the observer and the observed are one. Religious institutions resist because these principles return creative power to the individual rather than concentrating it in external authorities. If every person contains the divine creative force within their own imagination, what need is there for intermediaries? If the kingdom of heaven is within you, accessed through the assumption of your desires fulfilled, what purpose do elaborate hierarchies and complex doctrines serve? The democratization of divine power threat ends those who have built their authority on its scarcity. Educational systems resist because they are designed to produce workers who accept limitation rather than creators who transcend it. Schools teach children to look for answers outside themselves, to accept expert opinion over inner knowing, to prepare for a world of limitation rather than a life of unlimited possibility. The child who assumes their dreams fulfilled without external permission becomes a threat to systems built on the assumption that permission must be granted from outside. Economic structures resist because they depend on the belief in scarcity. If individuals begin to assume abundance and create it through the power of their imagination, what happens to markets built on the fear of lack? If people stop believing they must struggle and sacrifice to achieve their desires, how can they be motivated to perform jobs that serve others' visions rather than their own? The assumption of prosperity consciousness threatens economies built on artificial scarcity. Even the mind itself resists, protecting the familiar patterns that have defined its sense of identity. The ego, constructed from past experiences and current limitations, fights to maintain its definition of what is possible and impossible. It marshals every argument, every past failure, every reasonable objection to preserve its version of reality. To accept the creative power of imagination is to admit that all past limitations were self-imposed, and this recognition can be devastating to a sense of self built on those very limitations. The rational faculty, when it leads rather than follows, becomes particularly resistant to these truths. Reason demands proof before belief, evidence before assumption, manifestation before expectation. But this demand reverses the natural order of creation. Reason is designed to explain effects, not create causes. When it attempts to lead the creative process, it creates only more of what already exists, variations on familiar themes rather than genuine transformation. This resistance explains why so few discover and apply these principles successfully. The path requires a willingness to appear foolish to rational thinking, to assume realities that cannot be proven, to feel states that cannot be justified by circumstances. It asks you to live as if you are insane by the standards of conventional thinking, while maintaining enough sanity to function in a world that operates by different rules. Those who successfully navigate this challenge often find they must live a kind of double life. Outwardly, they participate in the world as it appears to be, following its rules and meeting its expectations. Inwardly, they live from the assumption of their desires fulfilled, feeling and acting from states that their external circumstances do not yet support. This requires a kind of spiritual maturity that few are willing to develop. The resistance is ultimately overcome not through argument or persuasion, but through results. When an individual begins to consistently create desired outcomes through the conscious direction of imagination and feeling, the evidence becomes undeniable, at least to them. They may never convince others, and they often stop trying, but they can no longer doubt the creative power of their own consciousness. This personal proof gradually builds confidence in the process. Each successful assumption that manifests as fact strengthens the belief in imagination's creative power. Each feeling fulfilled that becomes a reality reinforces the understanding that consciousness creates conditions rather than the reverse. Slowly, the individual begins to live more and more from this understanding, less and less from the old assumption of limitation and circumstance. The modern world presents a fascinating paradox. Never before have human beings possessed such sophisticated understanding of the physical universe, yet never before have so many felt so powerless to change their personal circumstances. We can split atoms and map genomes, but we cannot seem to create the lives we desire. We have mastered the external world to an unprecedented degree, while remaining slaves to internal states we believe we cannot control. This paradox exists because modern civilization has developed along entirely materialistic lines,